Hi, I'm Dwayne Morton. As someone who has navigated some of life's most difficult, unlikely, and untimely circumstances, I understand what it feels like to battle those challenges alone. That's why I created Show Up to Heal. This podcast is for the people who feel unheard, unseen, and unloved. This is where you can come and hear true stories and where man can have real conversations. But most importantly, this is a place where we're creating a community so you can feel supported. I want you to feel in this community that you are seen, heard, and loved. And if no one else has told you today, I love you. Welcome to Show Up to Heal. Hey everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to support me, continuing the podcast. And this is I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to create a movement, and that's what happened. And the next guy is a part of it. This is Show Up to Heal. This isn't Show Up to Win presents Show Up to Heal. This is just Show Up to Heal. And so I wanted to make that abundantly clear. So I want to bring up this next guy as I'm explaining this because he's a big part of the reason why I chose to do this. Brian, how you doing, sir?
Man, I'm awesome. And I'm always grateful to be with you, my friend. You are a good human and doing amazing things in this world. And I appreciate how kind you've been, even in the way that you've described the impact of our time together.
Absolutely. And that's why I chose you, man, for this, to kick off this podcast and to take what we created, that podcast series, that movement, and then just create something even more beautiful with the podcast. But also, you're one of the people that I met that just exemplifies the things that I exemplify, the integrity, the way your mission statement. I think me and you have a lot of similarities with our story. There's just so much of myself that I see in you, and I believe it's the same. And so I just wanted to say, like, I'm super grateful for your friendship. Like, I love that you're able to come on here to this podcast, but I know you're an extremely busy guy and be able to make time for me. And so I just wanted to share that. And that's why you were chosen for this episode. Like, I want you to know you were chosen. This wasn't.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you too. So I'm going to read off your bio and do the regular podcast stuff. So let's kick this off. Show Up to Heal. Brian doesn't just start outside with what you need to do. He starts inside with who you are. In a world that is disconnected, Brian is revolutionizing how individual leaders and entrepreneurs deeply connect with their authentic selves to achieve the best version of themselves. At just 7 years old, Brian was faced with a traumatic injury that most of us can barely imagine. He was run over by a truck and his left arm was severed from his body. After years of intensive rehabilitation and over 24 surgeries, Brian has a deep-lived understanding of how physical, emotional, and mental pain can keep people buried. Regardless of what their initial trauma was, his belief that everyone's story is as important as his own is what makes him one of the most accessible, relatable, and authentic individuals you will ever meet. And I'm going to say this, you are one of the most authentic people I have ever met.
I fully received that. And frankly, that's one of the greatest compliments you could give me. When my words, actions, and behaviors align with my intent and they can be received that way by others, that my genuine intent and who I am can be accessible by others like that. That's one of the elements of freedom that I think we all have the ability to create for ourselves. And it took me a long time to get here. There was a lot of things about myself that were protected and therefore disconnected in prior periods, and frankly would cause impressions or initial impressions that people would have to not always be accurate. And even if I felt as I was being authentic. And so thank you for saying that, Dwayne. I think to the whole point of what you talked about with the similarities within our stories and the connection and accessibility that we've had with each other. And I hope you hear this with all of that is real. And I think that same thing can be possible for interactions with almost anyone, right? If we allow ourselves to ask the right questions, to be vulnerable enough and open enough to find those connecting fibers in the stories that we all can connect with, right? Then we don't feel so isolated, disconnected, and alone. We actually instead can see ourselves in others, and we can see them in us, and we can find the similarity and the connection and the opportunity to walk this really difficult thing we call life together.
Man, that's beautifully said. I appreciate that, and I'm receiving what you're saying. And I think that's another thing is when I put in all the work with the energy work, that's really where I'm able to receive and appreciate, and words that maybe most men don't really truly understand the meaning of. And I know that you were at a part of your life where you had that change too.
Absolutely.
Could you speak on that a little bit, how that was, and going from that part to, 24 hours before you started energy work, where were you at?
So what's interesting is I had been doing energy work for about a decade before I really landed on this receiving component, right? And this like real element of gratitude. And why do I say that? Because I genuinely was doing energy work. I was going inward. I was connecting dots. I was asking questions. I was elevating consciousnness. I was doing things like Reiki, anything that I could do to heal, better understand, reconnect, physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. Like I was finding ways to activate those parts of myself. But the specific question you asked, I think, was more than the 24 hours before my energy work. And it was much more about a single question I asked one of my mentors about 4 or 5 years ago. I believed at this time that I was very aligned, that I was operating and existing in a lot of the ways that I've told you I desire, authentic. I was asking, I was putting good into the world. But I also didn't realize in the areas in my life that I lacked clarity or lacked accountability or lacked boundaries or lacked the ability to just even ask for help. It felt like a little bit of a gap. And I asked my mentor, I said, look, like I feel like I'm doing all these things right. If there was one thing that was glaring, one thing that you could identify that if you could remove from my world and it would just instantly change me, or that you need to make sure I understand, what is it? And he said, Brian, you're really shitty at receiving. I said, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. He says, yes, you are. And I said, okay, tell me more. I'm listening. He said, Brian, I've watched you for a long period of time being willing to run through walls, do the impossible, move mountains literally for people and organizations. And he said, and the truth of the matter is that if it is perceived to benefit someone else, there is nothing that will stop you. However, the second you believe that it's going to benefit you, you don't ask. And then on the flip side to that, without the ability to ask, I also would block opportunities for others to actually give, and therefore for me to receive. Great examples, and you heard language that I used just a minute ago that grounds this. You gave me a compliment, and I said, I fully received that. I started saying that as a practice to ground myself and ensure that I actually have active listening, and not just with my ears, but with my heart and my soul, so that I can have things that resonate, truly land, and actually be a fuel in my tank versus something that takes away. But I look back at 35 plus years of people would give me a compliment and I would diminish it. I'd make myself smaller. I'd say, no, I'm not that great. Or, oh, no. You're like, oh, no, everybody does that. Or, redirecting or deferring people. It's a way that I was blocking their ability to give as well as my ability to receive. And it would extend further than that. I was the guy that we would go to lunches or big group dinners or whatever, and I always had to be the one to pick up the bill. I would fight over the bill because for me, it was so important to pay that bill. And yet, if it's as important to me, I'm also shutting down anyone else's ability to give in those moments. Today, if someone fights me, I just completely surrender. And I say, thank you so much for treating. Thank you so much for the meal. Thank you so much for the company. It's little and it's minute, but it's behaviors like this that we don't even recognize are so hardwired into us that I was literally pushing people and opportunities away from me that were right in front of me, people asking to help me. So it was way bigger than even not being able to ask for help. It was like even when people offered, I rejected it right in front of them. Again, I'm shutting off their ability to give and receive. That's that full cycle. That's the energy cycle that goes in and out of this world. It's about giving and receiving. You can't have one without the other. And so I had to put lots and lots and lots of work into this. And even though my mentor told me this and hit me upside the face with a 2x4 when he told me so, it wasn't instantly ingrained and embodied either, because it's a practice. Just like anything else. I had to put myself in an aware position in any present moment so I could actually pay attention to what was I blocking? What was I protecting? What was I redirecting? What was I pushing away? And what were those opportunities to just say yes or thank you or I fully receive that? And I'll tell you, I genuinely poured from a cup that was often empty until I learned to receive. My giving has actually increased as a direct correlation to my ability to receive. And that was the big piece that my mentor said is essentially, Brian, because of who you are and what I know about you, even if every single thing you did personally benefited you, he said the way that you operate is anything that benefits you flows right through you and impacts and benefits anyone in your world. So you're actually accomplishing both. And I didn't see it that way, and I hadn't framed it that way, but it was a critical part of my healing. And why? Well, because, like I said in our last interview, I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant that my value and my worth was always contingent upon what I did for people. Not who I was, not how I could receive from them, not what they did for me. My value and my worth was so tied to what I did. And therefore, it was isolated and lonely and not connected.
I love that you were talking about the practice. Like, it doesn't just magically happen. I think that's where myself and people that have who approach me was like, hey, I have this magic pill, like it's a diet pill or something. I tell people it's a lot like losing weight. It's these little consistent actions, but also being tested as those actions are being taken and being able to really, really embody it. Let's talk about embodiment. What was one of the things that was the most difficult outside of receiving for you to embody?
That I'm safe, that I'm okay, that the world isn't against me, right? When we grow up with pain, physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain, it doesn't matter. Pain is pain, and it all hits all categories. Our nervous systems are hardwired to protect us, anticipate threat or risk, keep us alive, out of harm. And so what happens when we don't feel safe and protected and seen and understood and connected and all of these things is that we start to actually protect ourselves, and it shows up as control. It shows up as perfectionism. It shows up as, right, like ego even in some moments. And it certainly shows up in moments like anger. And why do I say all this? Because all of these pieces are ways that we can give ourselves the perception of safety in a moment, or we can make ourselves or fabricate ourselves to feel safe. But the ironic part about it is that when we're in control, when we are micromanaging, when we are perfectionist, when we can't let things go, when we do all these things, it actually takes us further and further and further away from safety, because it disconnects us from the whole picture, right? It's that analogy that I give often around the second that you protect yourself, you guarantee you won't disconnect yourself. And so embodiment becomes one of the most important vehicles, because we can intellectually learn something and believe something and know something. And one of the biggest gaps in most people's healing process and progress in self and personal development is the fact that we often know things and believe things before our body catches up. You know, I talk about the trash from our past, and what does that mean? The trash from our past is the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditions that create a set of beliefs and a set of cellular memory within our bodies that will only be further validated and activated in our lives to basically convince us that it's real until we recognize that it's not and break the pattern. You know, it's those moments where our bodies are still 30 years behind us in a moment, and we're reacting from that cellular memory and not having anything to do with what's right in front of us. You know, it's the ability to realize like we're not actually under attack. You know, I gave this example, I think, last time when we chatted, and if I didn't, then okay, but if I did, then it'll still connect to this point. My wife used to say something as really simple as this. Hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? But my shame and my anger filter, which prevented me from embodying the truth, would hear this. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what do you need to make up for it this weekend? To which point, I'm a great husband and father, and of course I'm going to defend the shit out of that. So what do? I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father when that wasn't even what she asked. Now, in that case, there was a big gap because not only intellectually did I not have a full belief, but I didn't embody the safety that was connected to that because I always felt like I was being challenged or I was always being put on the defensive. And the majority of that wiring took place long before my wife. She was just the recipient of my reaction. And so when we started to work on this anger piece, I had to understand it and see it first intellectually. I had to believe what was taking place. I had to recognize that I was creating damage. But then we would still show up in moments and I'd feel myself reacting, and my brain and my knowledge intellectually was the only thing that could allow me to settle and start to actually embody the feeling. What do I mean by that? She'd still react, or I'd still react to things that she said and not hear it correctly. And instead of reacting or trusting my body in that moment that was wrong and outdated, I had to ground myself and say something to the effect of, hey, babe, I just felt triggered by what I heard you say, which tells me maybe I didn't hear you correctly. Can you please restate it? And if I can't hear it with a more neutral lens, maybe can we pause this and revisit it later so that I don't create any damage? What am I doing? I'm closing the gap intentionally in a state of practice to realize that there's a misalignment between what I believe and what my body's trying to tell me in the moment. Embodiment, full embodiment, is when you collapse those two and they become one and the same. Where your intellectual beliefs, your physical beliefs, your emotional beliefs all start to become in alignment. And when they're not, you also have the ability to recognize which one is true and which one is lying to you so you can regulate in the moment. Embodiment is the thing that prevents people who believe that their brand, their business, their impact is the end-all be-all solution, but yet when they go ask for the business, they don't convey that in their energy. In fact, they shrink down and they're asking for permission for the sale instead of actually communicating their value. Intellectually, they believe what they have is real to offer, but yet they don't want to be an imposition to the other person, or they don't want to get rejected if they ask for too much. Right? Embodiment is actually the catalyst to a lot of our freedom, because when we can create that alignment intellectually, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, and we can embody the truth in the present moment without the need to carry something else, we really are free. And we can decipher any moment of any day what is true right in front of us. Does this make sense, Dwayne?
It does. And it also, I think it makes sense to a lot of the men that are going to be listening to this podcast, because they all have been triggered, started a disagreement, and they're like, how do we start a disagreement on that? So I think you've given people at least a path to realize what they have created that has caused that friction and that resistance from their partner.
The world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will only judge you based on what your words, actions, and behaviors and energy communicate, whether you're aware of it or not. Embodiment is making sure that your intent, your words, actions, behaviors, and energy are in alignment with your intent. It's that simple, but obviously that's very complex to get to.
Extremely complex, but it's nice that there is a good intention behind it. It's a lot better when the action reflects the intention.
Agree.
And that is such. When I started doing this work and when I was actually able to do that part, Brian, that's when the quantum leaps of my personal growth was. And so for the listeners, like I would say, start these little baby steps and create those consistent steps. And as you're creating these consistent steps, that's where you get into where people really, really see it. But you're seeing it in real time by yourself, and you're like, oh, I did this. Celebrate that. I think people don't celebrate that fact, especially when at the very beginning stages of personal growth.
Yeah, in fact, I think more often than not, it turns into a place of personal self-shame and blame, because then there's criticism when, because I know something, well, that's not how I experienced it. That's not how I felt in the moment. That's not what actually happened. So even if you know intellectually the concept, the growth, the pathway that you're on, if your body hasn't caught up, it's hard sometimes to accept that as part of the process, right? It is a part of the process. It's about getting yourself to communicate and connect holistically with each component. But that's where self-shame and blame comes into places. People say, oh, I know that. I've done this. I've done this in therapy for 10 years. Why am I still stuck in this problem? It's because the gap is almost always between the intellect and the embodiment. It's the gap between what you know intellectually and what your body still believes at a cellular level. And until you break those patterns and reprogram them, and to actively bring them into alignment, it doesn't just happen.
Alignment is such a key word there. I think I didn't understand what the word alignment meant for a long time until I started figuring out, hey, I'm in this situation, whether I created it or didn't, which I believe in my mind. So I believe I created it. As crazy as that happens, right? We manifest everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that was where I started at, was like, how can I backtrack? Like, what am I really wanting to do? And that was where it really got to that point where I was chasing alignment. And what I didn't realize was you don't chase alignment, you allow alignment.
I think you allow it and you create it. You don't chase it.
Yep.
I agree with your statement. Chasing it is performative and it's not structured, but you can create it and you can allow it. But that always starts with awareness, right? The biggest issue is most people don't even realize that they're out of alignment. Most people don't even realize that their words, actions, behaviors, and energy are not communicating what they intend to communicate through any of it, right? That's the piece that hurts us the most, is our lack of awareness. And that's why I say the trash from your past is not your fault, but it does become your responsibility once you become aware of it, or you start burying others in yours. And it is breakable. It is improvable. It is healable. And you can reverse anything. I don't care how damaging it's been or how destructive it's been internally. If the will is great enough and there's enough of a commitment to that process of the work, freedom can be created for any of us, regardless of how deep and dark our traumas are.
Yeah, let's talk about freedom, Brian. For you to go through what you went through physically, mentally, emotionally as a 7-year-old, and where we had conversation where you told me like how people wouldn't believe when you were saying the words. They would look to your parents to get the validation. Yep. How difficult was that to come to terms with and then be able to go and share your story for others?
So I don't believe that those two pieces are just like uniquely connected. Meaning, I think how long it took to get to terms with it and my ability to still go use my story to benefit others, I was able to compartmentalize and separate. Now, I say that with a caveat. There also was a much deeper and more direct level of impact once I was able to not have them be separate and I could see them for one and the same. But how long did it take for me to accept that? 30 years.
Wow.
and what do I mean by that? Because that conditioning caused me to believe that people were not going to believe me. which inherently means that anything that I say or any potential challenge or question could be received as challenging my own truth. And the way that I learned to deal with that was to get bigger in my energy, more clear in my words, and ultimately to try to prove why that was not actually the case, to defend my point, to defend my stance. It's the same energy that came up when I didn't hear my wife for what she actually said. And so I do believe that that ended up being a strong layer of benefit for me, because it did drive a lot of outcomes that were very positive. And that chip on my shoulder that I didn't know was a chip on my shoulder drove me to do lots of things that I may or may not would have otherwise done if I wasn't so focused on ensuring that the world would see me and believe me. Right? When you operate in a place where if you believe the world isn't going to believe you, I believed that I was going to set up a life and live my life in a way that the world could not refuse me. It's a performative, and it's a chasing, and it's a driving energy that did lead to lots of disconnection in my life. So it took me 30 years to be able to start to ground that and embody it. It goes fully back to the conversation we were just having. It was in my mid to late 30s when most of the freedom that I've created in my life has happened, right? In the last 5 to 6 years. And when I really see all of what it fed, it was positive. It did help me in lots of ways, but it also isolated me in many others. And so once I saw it, that's when I couldn't stop the work. Meaning, I'm one of those that I could be dumb, blind, and dense for decades, but the second I see what's important, I have no other alternative other than to focus on it. And so what this all leads to is what I believe that exists in freedom. I believe freedom is what we all want, but I don't believe freedom truly exists for any of us as an individual until we are at a place in our lives where we have nothing to justify, protect, or defend about ourselves to anyone. That doesn't mean unbridled dickhead authenticity. It says who I am, take it or leave it. That doesn't mean be an asshole. What that means is nothing about my self-view, nothing about my self-worth, nothing about my abilities, my value, my interests, the things that light me up, where my boundaries exist, how I'm going to position myself in the marketplace. None of that is influenced or dependent on anyone external anymore in my life. I can be unwavering in any environment, and I also don't have anything that I need to justify, protect, or defend, which means if I get challenged and it's not a thoughtful, integrated conversation, it just brushes right off of me. It doesn't get embedded. It's not something I feel the need to defend or react to. And I really am detached from a lot of that at this point because I am so clear in who I am. And by the way, that does not mean that I'm not still a work in progress. That does not mean that I don't still have many coaches and mentors. That does not mean that I'm perfect in every one of these interactions. Far from it. It's my first time being human too. But the reality of this is that I do have a lot more freedom in my day-to-day because I'm not really worried about what the outcome, the reaction, someone's opinion is going to be. Because if I stay aligned and I can consistently live in alignment with who I am, what else do I have? It's it. And that's where we truly can escape those things that we've put in place to, again, protect ourselves, give us the perception of safety. It's a trap. And every time you build a wall to protect yourself from something or someone, it's another wall that isolates you further from other people. And I'm all about breaking those things down now. And in a way that I don't need to compete. I don't need to raise my voice. I don't need to challenge. I can just be. And either the truth is accepted for what it is, or it's not the place I'm meant to be, and that's okay.
So one thing that you said was about isolation. I think a lot of times when we go through isolation, that's really what elevates our wanting self-love, our desire for self-love, our desire for compassion for ourselves. Did that happen for you?
I think the inevitable process of isolation paired with a desire for improvement is what allows us to experience that. I think there is self-isolation that also can go in a negative downward spiral, and it's not forward focused and productive. And I've had moments there too, right? Like it's just the truth. And so for me, it's interesting because I used to describe that I understand what it's like to be the only one in every room I walk into. I really am. I've never met anybody like me that's gone through the exact same thing as me, who's experienced what I have in the way that I have, that can relate to my upbringing. Like I'm used to being the only one in every room. And so I say that because I also got very used to, for most of my life, being in rooms and environments where I was surrounded by people and I still felt completely alone. Now I can be completely alone and never feel lonely. And so there is a big difference in those two things. And so for me, so much of my life was built to be in the front eye, to be in front and around people. But because I myself still had things that I was justifying, protecting, and defending about myself, I would still show up and often feel as if most people didn't understand. They didn't get it. They didn't see. They didn't whatever. Why? Because that was the perpetuated belief system that I lived in. But I cared very much that they did, because that's where my value was tied, was on their opinion, their feedback, their whatever, right? And that's why I would often feel that way. So I think isolation is both something that happens without us realizing that it's happening, as it is something that we can create. And I do believe it is a pathway that can lead towards self-love, as long as it's not living right alongside, right, an apathetic lack of desire to put in the work and improve. Because just being isolated alone doesn't lead to self-love. It still takes effort and focus.
Yeah, I love that. I think the other aspect of it is self-destruction.
Correct.
And so, yeah. So one thing that you hit on is like, and I think this is where me and you are so much alike, is how we can be in a room of one really quick, man. Like be in that room of one really quick in every room. And I love that you touched on that, because like I love to learn from these podcasts. I love to learn just different things from other people. It's really interesting when people are coming to you for something all the time. It's almost a burden in some ways. And I feel like that was the way I felt for a while. And then when I really released that, like, hey, I can really help these people, and this isn't a burden. This is something that's God sent on me. And I can really have an impact. Can you bring me back to that moment for you?
Yeah, so I think there's two layers to what you just said. The first is being able to recognize that I'm the only one in every room I walk into. And the reason I start there is because, why do I say that? Because I don't know what it's like to have walked in your shoes. I don't know what it's like to be a black man. I don't know what it's like to be transgender. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, right? I don't know what it's like. I mean, the list could go on. I don't know what it's like to be so many other people that also identify with often being the only one in every room they walk into. And so, though I don't know what it's like to be in any of their shoes, I do know the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, the isolation, the disconnection, the loneliness that can come in all of that. And so why do I say that? Because I think the ability to recognize that you are the only one in every single room, and often have been, is also a direct pathway to be able to communicate and connect with other people. Because I would argue that there are many people that feel that way, even if from the outside it may not appear that they would be the only one in every room they've walked into. And so it's a way to meet people where they are and connect based on common ground of experience in this human experience that we all live. And I think that's an important piece, because it's about recognizing where we fit in the ecosystem and how similar we are to other people. The second layer that you put in there, though, and it is connected to this, and it is connected particularly to those that can deliver value, is I lived a lot of my life and still have to pay attention to the fact that more people want something from me than they want for me. Now, I agree with your repositioning on this burden and your ability to recognize that it is a gift, it's an opportunity, it's all these things, but we also have to recognize when we're being taken advantage of, when we are giving far and well above and beyond what we could, and are doing so. We also, as people pleasers and people who've said yes and want to create impact, have to pay attention to how often are we saying yes when it isn't in alignment with who we are and what we do, or when it's beyond our capacity to do so, yet we're doing it still anyway. Because it is a burden, and it is something that can be a drain when you aren't, again, aware and aligned in those factors, right? Because so many times people say yes far beyond their ability to actually deliver. And it's not because they can or they feel like they want to, it's because they feel like they need to. Otherwise, they have no value in the situation. And so I think it's really two sides to the same coin, this people wanting from and people wanting for. We have to know our value, and we have to be able to recognize how do we communicate that value so we can connect with others. But we also have to pay attention to where are our boundaries, and how do we state those in a clear and communicative way so that we are protecting ourselves, not in a need to protect, but rather in a clarity and understanding perspective. Because there are many people that will ask me for things, and if I'm not careful, I'll say yes. But that one yes takes me further away from so much more impact that I could actually have. Because it's distracting me, it's lowering me, it's redirecting me. And so it's as much about alignment in that dynamic as it is about, right, this being the only one in every room and being in a position where we're feeling the tax and the burden, but we don't see the other side of it, which goes back to receiving in the very first part of the conversation. You can only give from that gifted place if you also are being blessed and able to receive. It's just a fact.
Yeah, the give and receive, it always goes back to the giving and receiving. And, most people take that into just money, but money's still energy. And like, that's what I want everyone to really just sit back and just think. Everything in here is energy. This table, this microphone, everything is energy. And I know with the podcast series, there was some people that really understood that. And then there was people that just like, they didn't understand that concept.
Yeah. It's real. It's real.
So one of the things, Brian, that I wanted to, there's so many things for us, for men's mental health that we're going to touch on. Suicide was a big one, but I didn't want to just go into the doom and the gloom part. I wanted to show people that, hey, do some self-improvement, look into yourself, self-love, self-compassion. And these were the conversations that I was wanting to have, because the other stuff is always got in front row, center stage, when it's really the other stuff that lead into these destructive paths.
Look, at the end of the day, almost all the freedom that we desire comes internally and can be generated internally. People are still waiting for someone to ride in on a, white horse in shining armor to save them, to save the day. And I don't mean this to sound crass or negative. It's to say that no one's coming. But what I will suggest is that if each and every one of you listening could understand the power that lies within you, the ability to rewrite narratives, beliefs, feelings, embodiment, awareness, understanding, it simply comes from a desire and the courage to find in and stand in your truth. Because the old adage is true. The truth will set you free. The issue is that most people aren't willing to dig through their trash to find the truth that will surface. You know, and it's interesting because if we tangibilize this down to an action and a motivation piece, if you ask somebody, hey, if you accidentally dropped your wedding ring in the trash can, you dropped your car keys in the trash can, you dropped a family heirloom in the trash can, you lose any of these things, would you jump in and get it? And inevitably, the answer is almost always yes. People are like, yes, of course I'd dig in and get my wedding ring. Of course I'd get the keys to my car. Of course I'd get that heirloom. Of course I'd get that memento that made me connect with my kid. They're willing to jump into the dumps of the world, the dumpsters of the world, to surface these physical, tangible things that actually represent the stuff that matters most to us, which most often is relationships with others. And yet they're not willing to look inside here and dig through the trash that actually can remove the very barriers, the very hurdles, the very layers of protection that are preventing you from deepening those relationships in the first place. And so that's the question I ask many people, is if you're willing to jump into a dumpster to get a small ring and circle of material and metal that represents a relationship and a marriage, what are you actually willing to do to save that relationship and marriage? And it's not a challenge. It's not a negative line of sight. It's just, how badly do you want the freedom on the other side? Because it's available to all of us. And it's not that far away. But it does require asking the right questions and making some choices to put yourself in the position to do so. And that's what I believe so much in, my friend.
Man, I appreciate that. So, Brian, I want you to give you some time to just tell people where they can find you, where they can see, be able to experience, where you can talk about your podcast, those type of things. So I'm just going to back off and let you speak for a little bit.
If you're a web-based person, go to brianbogert.com or just Google my name. If you Google my name, you'll see a ton of podcasts. I've been a guest on, I don't even know the number anymore, well over 1,500 in the last probably 6 years. And so there's a lot of evolution of my story and the things that are all out there. If you're on social media, I'm at Bogert Brian on all channels and stations, including YouTube. At the end of the day, my friend, what I care most about is whether or not somebody visits my world, is that if they heard something of value today, that they put something into motion, into movement, into action, right? Genuinely, I believe that move people, and we're on a mission to impact well over 1 billion lives as quickly as we can, realizing that 99.9% of them will never pay us $1. But if moved people, then if you heard something that moved you, all I'm asking is that you move it through your world, whether I know about it ever or not. If you heard one thing that helped you, share it, tell someone else, communicate it, apply it in your own life. Like, far beyond you coming and visiting and downloading or consuming even more of our content, take the one thing that hit you most today and do something with it.
Man, that's powerful. That is the best mission statement I've ever heard, man. Like, I just want to tell you, I've heard plenty of mission statements. I just what you are creating, what you are about. This is the go for me, and I just like being able to see living proof of it has been one of the most amazing, incredible experiences for me, is getting to meet you. And I'm blown away every time that we get to have a conversation, because I learn so much and I'm able to take something and apply it immediately to my life. And I pray that these people that are listening to it take something from me or from this conversation and apply it into their life, because that changes things. And it's like you said, move people.
Yep. That's right. Dwayne, I'm grateful for you, my friend. I'm grateful for how kind you are to me and how much you articulate and communicate the impact and the work that you're committing to for yourself that's providing so much impact for others. It's obvious to see the commitment in you, and it's really beautiful, frankly, when you can see someone who actually takes action on what you've given them. That's an ability for me to receive every time I get to witness you do that. And so thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for building a platform for me to come pour some good into the world, because I realize that none of this would have existed without your ability and commitment to create these shows to help other people.
Man, you're welcome. All right. So that is going to be this first episode of Show Up to Heal. And I know that someone is going to get extreme value. And it's like I told someone the other day, I'm not trying to be everything for everyone. I'm just trying to bring value to everyone. Show Up to Heal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching another episode of Show Up to Win presents Show Up to Heal. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. Thank you.